I want to be clear about something before I tell this story. I spent 26 years in law enforcement. I started as a patrol officer in a small county in northern Minnesota and worked my way up to sergeant before I retired in 2018. I've written more incident reports than I can count. I've testified in court under oath more times than most people have sat in a jury box. I know what it means to observe something carefully, document it accurately, and stand behind what I recorded without embellishment and without omission. I built a career on that discipline, so when I tell you that what I witnessed during my final shift and what the dashcam footage captured before the system went dark was not an animal that anyone in that department could identify or explain, I need you to understand that I am not someone who uses those words lightly or without understanding exactly what they mean. I have not watched that footage since the night they told me the file was corrupted. I do not believe the file was corrupted. I have never believed that, not for a single day in the 6 years since it happened. But I am 61 years old now, my knees are gone, and the retirement I worked toward for most of my adult life has a way of clarifying what battles are still worth fighting and which ones you have already lost. I'm telling this story now because there are things I kept quiet about out of professional obligation and institutional loyalty that I no longer feel I owe to anyone. There are people who go into those forests and those roads without knowing what I know, and that has weighed on me long enough. It was the first week of November, 2017. The shift was routine by the standards of that county, which is to say, almost nothing ever happened out there. We covered a wide rural territory northwest of Duluth, dense pine and birch forest, broken up by logging roads and lake access points, and a few small towns where the population had been declining quietly for 30 years, and where nothing much had changed since the 1970s. The kind of place where people still leave their doors unlocked, and the most common call we handled on a night shift was a noise complaint from someone whose neighbor was running a generator too late into the evening. I had worked that patrol zone for most of my career. I knew every bend in every back road. I knew where the ice would be thin in early winter and which logging operations would have trucks out before dawn and which stretches of Route 7 would drift over in a northwest wind and need to be driven carefully. I knew the particular smell of that forest on a cold November night, the pine resin and the lake water, and the faint mineral smell of frozen earth. It was familiar ground in the most complete sense of the word. I want you to understand that because the familiarity matters. What happened did not happen in a place I did not know. It happened on ground I had covered thousands of times, in conditions I understood completely. And that is part of why it has never left me the way it has not left me. The call came in just after 2 in the morning. A motorist had called dispatch to report what she described as a large animal standing in the road on County Route 7, approximately 14 miles east of the town of Orr. She sounded shaken, but she was coherent, and she was giving clear information, which told me she was not panicked, just genuinely unsettled. She said it was upright. She said it was very large. She said it was not a bear, and she said that with enough certainty that the dispatcher noted it in the call log rather than recoding it as an uncertain wildlife sighting. Dispatch sent me because I was the closest unit. I acknowledged, turned north on Route 7, and started driving. I was not concerned. We received calls like that a few times every year, and they almost always had ordinary explanations. A bull moose standing in the roadway looks enormous and wrong to someone who has not seen one up close at night, and a draft horse that has gotten out through a fence can stop traffic and make grown adults question what they are looking at. Big animals in headlights at 2 in the morning are strange looking, even when they are exactly what they are. I had resolved enough of those calls over the years that this one registered as routine before I had even turned onto the county road. I was already thinking about the report I would write in the morning and whether the motorist had pulled far enough off the road to be safe while she waited. The first thing I noticed, though I did not fully register it as significant until later, was the deer. I am accustomed to seeing white-tailed deer along that corridor in early November. They are dense in that territory during the rut, grazing the road shoulders in the early morning hours, crossing in small groups in front of your headlights, standing in the ditches with their eyes reflecting back at you like small orange flames. It is one of the consistent hazards of patrolling that stretch of road in the weeks before Thanksgiving. But in the 6 or 7 miles, I drove before reaching the approximate location the caller had described. I saw none. Not a single deer in my headlights, not a single pair of eyes reflecting from the tree line, not a single shadow moving through the underbrush along the shoulder. The road and the forest bordering it were empty in a way they almost never were at that hour, and the emptiness had a quality to it that I could feel, but could not at that moment have explained to anyone. I noticed it the way you notice something small and wrong in a familiar room, the way absence registers before you have identified what is missing. The road out there runs straight for long stretches before bending through a series of low areas near a creek drainage about 12 miles on air. I had my dashcam running the way I always did. Standard procedure, every shift, every call. The unit was mounted on the windshield just below the rearview mirror, and the indicator light was green when I checked it out of habit as I turned onto the county road. The exterior temperature sensor read 23 degrees Fahrenheit. There was no wind. The sky was completely clear, and the stars were hard and bright the way they get out there when the temperature drops and the humidity goes out of the air entirely. It was the kind of night that feels sealed off from everything, quiet in a way that has actual weight to it. And in 26 years of night shifts in rural Minnesota, I had learned to pay attention to that kind of quiet even when I could not articulate why it deserved attention. I came around the long curve that precedes the low creek section, and my headlights swept across the road ahead, and I put on the brakes without making a conscious decision to do so. There was something standing at the edge of the pavement approximately 40 yards out, positioned just at the outer limit of what my headlights could reach clearly. I could not resolve the details from that distance, but I could see that it was standing upright and that it was large, larger than a deer, larger than most things that had any business standing in the middle of a county road at 2 in the morning in November. I reached for my radio with one hand and held the vehicle stopped with the other, and I looked at what was standing in that road and I waited for my brain to give it a name. It did not move when my lights reached it. That was the first thing I registered as genuinely wrong, not strange. Not unusual, but wrong in the specific way that something is wrong when it contradicts what experience has taught you to expect. A bear will react to headlights. A moose will shift its weight or turn its head. A deer will either bolt or stand trembling with every muscle visibly tense. Anything caught in sudden light does something with its body, makes some adjustment, because that is what animals do when they are startled or illuminated unexpectedly. This did not move at all. It stood in the outer reach of my headlights with an absolute stillness that I have tried many times since that night to find a natural explanation for, and I have never managed it. I keyed my radio, told dispatch I was on scene and had a visual on an unidentified large animal, and then I eased the vehicle forward. The dashcam was recording. The indicator light was green. The timestamp was running. Whatever was standing in that road was within the camera's field of view. And the camera was active, and I have never stopped thinking about what that recording would have shown if the file had not been corrupted, or if the file had actually been corrupted, which I do not believe. As I closed the distance, the shape of it resolved, and I want to be careful here about how I describe what I saw, because I have been careful about this for 6 years, and I am not going to abandon that discipline now simply because I no longer answer to anyone who can take something from me. What was standing in that road was bipedal. It was standing on 2 legs in a way that was not the posture of a bear risen up out of curiosity or alarm. The stance was settled, balanced, the weight distributed the way weight is distributed by something that stands upright, not as an occasional behavior, but as its natural way of existing in the world. The shoulders were too wide, and the arms were too long, and the proportions across the torso and the neck were wrong in a way I cannot fully render in words except to say that when you have spent your entire adult life looking at human beings, you develop an instinctive sense of human proportion, and what I was looking at violated that sense completely and without ambiguity. The head was large. Even at 30 yards, I could see that the head was large in a way that did not correspond to a human skull or a bear's skull or anything I had a ready category for. I stopped the vehicle at what I estimated was 30 yards. I left the engine running. I did not get out. I sat in the cab and I looked at this thing, and I want to be honest with you about what I felt in that first sustained moment of looking at it, because I think honesty about that part matters as much as the physical description. I did not feel panic. I felt something that I can only describe as a profound refusal, the way the mind sometimes simply declines to complete the process of recognizing something that has no place in its established understanding of the world. It was not denial, exactly. It was more like a pause, a suspension of the machinery of interpretation, while something deeper and older than training tried to decide what to do with what the eyes were sending back. I told dispatch my location a second time and requested a backup unit, and they acknowledged, and I sat there and watched what was in that road watch me. It was watching me. I want to be precise about that because it matters and because I have thought about it more times than I can count. The head was oriented toward my headlights, and there was something in the quality of that orientation, some quality of directed, deliberate attention that I recognized from decades of standing across from people who were making decisions about what to do next. It was not the blank reflexive fixation of an animal held by light. It was the kind of attention that takes inventory, the kind that weighs things. I've interviewed suspects across a table in a small room, and I've felt that kind of attention coming from the other side of the table. And sitting in that patrol vehicle on a frozen county road at 2 a.m, I felt it again, coming from something standing 40 yards ahead of me in the dark. I do not know exactly how long I sat there before it moved. Time does strange things in moments like that, and my memory of the duration is not reliable. What I remember is that it moved without urgency. It took a single step to the left, laterally, not retreating and not advancing, just shifting its position relative to the road and to my vehicle, and the step was long and unhurried and placed with a deliberateness that I found more deeply unsettling than speed would have been. It moved to the road shoulder, and it did not break its attention away from my vehicle while it did so. I turned on my spotlight. I do not know exactly why I did that, rather than something else. It was a trained reflex. Illuminate the unknown, get a better look, gather more information. The beam reached out and hit what was standing on the shoulder of that road, and I got the better look I had reached for. And I'm not going to tell you that it helped. The fur was dark, close to black in the beam, and the way it stood was not the way any animal I had ever encountered in the field stood. The posture had intention in it. It had patience. The face, and I will only describe this once, and I will describe it plainly, was not the face of anything in the forests of northern Minnesota. It was not the face of anything I had a name for. I reached for the door handle. My hand was on it. I am telling you that because I want you to understand I was still operating out of training and procedure up to that moment, still trying to run the call the way a call is supposed to be run. And then I did not open the door. I let go of the handle, and I did not open the door, and I am not going to characterize that as anything other than what it was. Every layer of professional training I had, and every quieter, older layer of instinct underneath the training, arrived at exactly the same conclusion at exactly the same moment, and the conclusion was to stay inside the vehicle. Then the dash cam shut off. Not the engine, not the radio, not the spotlight, which was still throwing its beam across the road shoulder, just the dash cam. The indicator light went dark, and the timestamp disappeared, and I sat in that cab, and I understood that whatever had been recorded up to that moment was the last thing that unit was going to capture that night. And in the silence that followed, I heard something move in the darkness behind the truck. Not in front of me where my lights were. Behind me, where there was nothing but dark road and dark forest, and whatever had decided to stop letting me know where it was. Did not turn around. I want to be clear about that because it might seem like the obvious thing to do, to spin in the seat and put the spotlight on whatever was moving behind the vehicle, to get eyes on it the way training says you get eyes on any unknown presence at your back. But the sound behind me, and the thing still standing at the edge of my spotlight beam in front of me, had produced a very specific understanding in some part of my mind that operates below conscious decision-making. And that understanding was that turning my back on what was in front of me was not something I was going to do. I sat facing forward with both hands on the wheel, and I listened to what was behind me, and I watched what was in front of me, and I tried to breathe evenly, and I told myself the things you tell yourself in those moments, that there is an explanation, that the explanation is ordinary, that in 11 minutes another unit would come around that curve from the south, and the lights and the radio and the presence of another officer would reduce whatever this was to something that could be written into a report and filed and forgotten. The sound behind the truck was not continuous. It came in intervals, patient and unhurried, the way sounds come from something that is not trying to close distance quickly, but is instead moving with a specific and considered purpose that does not require speed. I heard it twice to the left of the vehicle's rear, and then once closer, maybe 15 or 20 feet back by my estimate, and then nothing for a long stretch that felt much longer than it probably was. The silence between sounds was in some ways worse than the sounds themselves, because silence in that context was not the absence of something, but the presence of something that had chosen to stop making noise, and that choice implied awareness and decision-making in a way that I could not set aside, no matter how hard I tried. The thing at the shoulder of the road ahead had not moved during any of this. It was still standing at the edge of my spotlight's reach, still oriented toward the vehicle, and the quality of its stillness during those sounds behind me communicated something that I have never been able to fully articulate, but that I understood clearly in the moment. It was not startled by the movement behind me. It was not reacting to it the way an animal reacts to an unexpected sound nearby, with a flinch or a shift of attention or even a flicker of the ears toward the source. It already knew exactly what was back there. The stillness was not the stillness of an animal that had not noticed something. It was the stillness of something that had no reason to be surprised by what was happening behind my truck, because what was happening behind my truck was already accounted for. I keyed my radio again and gave dispatch my precise location and told them I needed that backup unit as soon as possible, not as a request, but as a statement of operational necessity, the kind of language that tells a dispatcher to stop managing the queue and move the available unit now. The dispatcher acknowledged and said the nearest unit was 11 minutes out. 11 minutes is not a long time under ordinary circumstances. Sitting in that vehicle on that road with what was in front of me and what was behind me, and the dashcam indicator. Dark on the windshield, 11 minutes was an incomprehensible span of time. I told dispatch to keep the channel open, and I set the radio on the seat beside me so I could hear any traffic without taking my hands off the wheel, and I did not take my eyes off what was standing at the edge of my spotlight. The cold was something I became aware of gradually, which surprised me later when I thought about it. The vehicle's heater was running, but I became aware at some point during those minutes of waiting that I was cold in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature inside the cab. It was the kind of cold that starts in the chest and moves outward, and I recognized it from 2 or 3 moments over the course of my career when a situation had moved past the edge of my training and experience into territory where something more fundamental than training was making the decisions. I had felt it once, pulling a teenager out of a car that was partially submerged in a drainage ditch in March, the water black and the current stronger than I expected. I had felt it once walking into a farmhouse on a welfare check, where I knew before I touched the door that what was inside was not going to be something I could fix. I felt it again sitting in that patrol vehicle on Route 7 at 2 in the morning in November, and the familiarity of it told me something I did not want to know about the nature of what I was dealing with. At some point in the next few minutes, and I cannot place it more precisely than that because my sense of time during that stretch was genuinely unreliable, the thing at the road shoulder moved again. Not dramatically, not with any sudden commitment to a direction, but a slow shift of weight that changed its orientation slightly, bringing it more squarely to face the vehicle rather than maintaining the angled stance it had been holding since I first put the spotlight on it. It was a small adjustment, and in any other context, it would have been meaningless, the kind of postural shift any large animal makes while standing still for an extended period. But in that context, with what was moving behind me, and with the sustained and deliberate attention that had been directed at my vehicle since the first moment my headlights swept across that road, that small shift registered as something more than a postural adjustment. It felt like a decision reaching its conclusion. The spotlight was still running, and I could see it clearly enough to know with certainty that what I was looking at was not going to resolve itself into something with an ordinary explanation, no matter how long I looked at it or how much the rational part of my mind wanted it to. The size was wrong for any animal I could name. The way it held itself upright was wrong. The patience of it was wrong. The absolute absence of the restlessness that animals display when they are standing still in an open area, the small, constant movements of the head and the ears and the weight, the continuous processing of environmental information that you can see in any wild animal if you watch it long enough. This thing was still in the way that something is still when it has already processed all the information it needs and is waiting for a specific condition to be met. The eyes were what I kept returning to in the days and weeks and years after that night, because the eyes were what the spotlight revealed most clearly, and what I have had the hardest time accounting for in any framework that does not require me to accept things I spent most of my life not believing in. They reflected back when the beam caught them at the right angle, the way animal eyes reflect in light, but the quality of the reflection was different from any animal I had illuminated in 26 years of night patrols. I am aware that this sounds like the kind of statement that cannot be verified or defended, and I am telling you anyway, because it is what I observed, and I committed a long time ago to not editing my observations to make them more acceptable. The reflection had a quality of depth to it that I had not seen before, not brighter, not more intense, but deeper, as if the light was being returned from somewhere further back than the surface of the eye. I have tried many times to find a physiological explanation for that impression, and I have not found one that satisfies me. I heard the sound behind the truck again, closer this time, and this time it resolved briefly into something I could identify with enough precision that I wished I could not. It was a footstep, a single footstep on frozen gravel, the specific compression and crunch of significant weight settling onto a cold road surface, and it was close enough that I perceived it as much through the seat and the floor of the vehicle as through my ears. I found myself looking at the driver's side mirror without having decided to, and in the mirror I saw the road behind me extending back into the dark beyond my taillights, and I saw nothing in it, because whatever had made that sound was not within the mirror's field of view. It was behind the mirror's field of view. It was that close to the rear of the vehicle, and it was not visible in any mirror I had, and I sat with that knowledge for a moment that I cannot assign a duration to. I put the vehicle in reverse. I want to be transparent about what that decision was and what it was not. It was not a tactical withdrawal in any formal sense. It was not the product of a risk assessment or a procedural calculation. It was the decision of a man who had spent 26 years moving toward problems, because that was what the job required, and who understood in that moment with a completeness that bypassed argument that this was not a problem that moving toward it was going to resolve. I put the vehicle in reverse and I began moving slowly, because the road was narrow and the ditches on either side were deep, and going into a ditch out there, at that hour in those circumstances, was not an outcome I was willing to consider. I kept my eyes forward as I moved backward, watching the thing at the road shoulder, watching the spotlight beam shorten the distance between us as I reversed, and then stabilize as I found a pace that held it at roughly the same distance. The thing at the road shoulder watched me go. That is the only description I have for what it did as I reversed away from it. It did not pursue. It did not retreat. It stood at the edge of my receding spotlight beam, and it watched me back away from it with the same quality of directed, deliberate attention it had maintained since the beginning. And there was something in the steadiness of that watching that communicated more clearly than any aggressive display could have that my departure was not a surprise to it and was not a relief to it, and did not change anything fundamental about the situation from its perspective. It had assessed my vehicle and made whatever calculations it made, and now it was watching me leave, and the watching had the same quality as everything else it had done, patient and complete and entirely unhurried. Just before the curve of the road took it out of my spotlight range entirely, it moved. Not toward me, not in pursuit, but a single deliberate step back to the center of the road, as if it were reclaiming the position I had interrupted, as if the road and the dark corridor of forest surrounding it had always been its territory, and my presence in it had been a temporary condition that was now resolving itself back to the normal order of things. That image, that single unhurried step back to the center of the road, is the last thing I saw before the curve intervened. and it is the image that has remained most consistently with me in the years since. Not the size of it, not the face of it, not even the footstep behind the truck. That one step back to the center of the road, taken without urgency or triumph or any discernible emotion, taken the way you step back into a room that briefly had a visitor, and now does not. I reversed until I reached a wider section of road where I could execute a three-point turn, and then I drove south on Route 7 at a speed I am not going to quantify, with my spotlight still running and casting its beam into the tree line on either side, and my eyes going to the mirrors every few seconds, and the radio open on the seat beside me. I did not speak to dispatch during that drive. I did not know what to say to dispatch that would fit inside the language that dispatch and incident reports and official records are built to receive. The backup unit met me approximately 3 miles south of where the encounter had occurred. The officer who responded was someone I had worked alongside for 9 years. A man with good judgment and no patience for dramatics, which is exactly the kind of person you want to see coming around a curve toward you at 2:30 in the morning in those circumstances. He took one look at my face through the windshield as our vehicles approached each other, and I could see him recalibrate his expectations before he even got out of his car. He asked me what had happened, and I told him I had encountered an unidentified large animal behaving in an unusual manner, and that I had withdrawn from the scene, and that I did not recommend approaching without additional units and better light conditions. That was what I said. Those were the exact words I chose, and I chose them carefully, because they were true as far as they went, and because they were words the system could process without requiring me to say the things the system could not process. He looked at me for a moment after I finished, and I could see him deciding whether to ask a follow-up question, and then he decided not to, which told me that my face was communicating something my words were not, and that he had decided to respect the gap between them. He got on his radio and requested a Wildlife Services callback for the morning, and we agreed to hold at our current position until the watch commander cleared us, and that is what we did. We sat in our vehicles on the side of Route 7, with our lights running, and we waited for the sky to start changing, and we did not go back up the road. The dashcam footage was reviewed the following morning by the department's equipment technician. He told my watch commander that the file had experienced a recording interruption consistent with an electrical fault in the camera unit, and that the footage from approximately the time of my initial stop through the remainder of the shift was unrecoverable. The unit was examined and found to have no mechanical defect that would explain the interruption. It was replaced anyway, as a precaution. No further technical investigation was conducted. No further operational investigation was conducted. The incident was logged as a wildlife obstruction call, animal unidentified, no further action required, and that entry is still in the system today if you know where to look for it. 3 lines of text representing the most significant thing that happened to me in 26 years of law enforcement. I filed my report in the language the form required, and the system accepted it. And I went home at the end of that shift, and I sat in my kitchen for a long time before I went to bed. My wife asked me if I was all right, and I told her I was tired, which was true, and she accepted it the way she had learned to accept the things I brought home from night shifts without being able to talk about them yet. I never did talk to her about that night in any complete way. There is a version of the story I have told her, a version that is accurate in its facts and incomplete in its meaning. And she knows it is incomplete, and she has never pressed me on the gap, which is one of the many reasons I've been grateful for her across the years. I retired the following spring. I told people it was the knees, which was true in the sense that the knees were genuinely deteriorated, and the department's physician had been recommending reduced field duty for 2 years. But it was not the complete truth. The complete truth is that I spent the winter after that November night doing something I had not done in 26 years of law enforcement, which was dreading the start of a shift. Not because I expected to encounter that thing again on Route 7, though that possibility lived in the back of my mind, the way a persistent low-grade sound lives in a room, something you stop consciously hearing, but that continues to affect you in ways you cannot fully account for. I dreaded the shifts because I could no longer approach that patrol zone with the settled familiarity I had spent a career building. The ground I knew best had become the place where my understanding of what the world contained had opened up in a way I had not asked for and could not close, and I did not know how to do the job from inside that opening. The job requires a certain confidence in your understanding of what you are going to encounter, a confidence built from experience and training and the accumulated weight of thousands of ordinary nights. I no longer had that confidence in the way I needed it, and I was honest enough with myself to know that a patrol officer who has lost that confidence is a liability to the people he is supposed to protect. I did some reading after I retired. Quiet reading, the kind you do without mentioning to anyone what you are looking for or why. There are more accounts from that part of Minnesota than most people would expect, from hunters primarily, and logging crews, and one written account from a state highway maintenance worker that described something standing at the tree line along a section of Route 7 in the spring of 2014, 3 years before my own encounter, that matched what I had seen in enough specific details that I read it through 3 times before I set it down. None of those people had filed official reports. None of them had wanted to be on record with what they had seen. I understood that without needing it explained to me. I am not going to tell you what I believe about what was in that road on the night of November 4th, 2017. I am going to tell you what I observed, and I'm going to let the observation stand on its own because that is what the work of 26 years taught me to do, and it is the only discipline I have left that still feels entirely intact. What I observed was something large and bipedal and deliberate, something that watched my vehicle with a quality of attention I had not encountered in an animal in more than 2 decades of night patrol in rural wilderness terrain, something that coordinated with whatever was behind my truck, in a way that implied awareness and intent and a kind of patience that I associate not with animals, but with things that have decided they can afford to wait. What I concluded from those observations is something I keep to myself, not because I am uncertain about it, but because certainty about something like this is a weight you carry alone. You do not share it in a way that makes the carrying easier. You simply carry it and you keep going. There are roads in that part of northern Minnesota where the forest comes to the edge of the shoulder, and the nearest town is 40 minutes away in either direction, and the cell coverage drops out somewhere around mile marker 9 on Route 7 and does not return until you are well south of the creek drainage. If you drive those roads at night in November, in the cold and the dark with the stars hard and bright overhead and the forest sealed in on either side, you are in a place that is not as empty as it appears. I know that now in a way that is not intellectual, not a conclusion reached through research or reasoning, but something that lives in the body the way certain kinds of knowledge do, the kind that came in through the senses under extreme conditions and took up residence somewhere below the reach of argument. The dashcam file was corrupted. That is the official record, and it will remain the official record. I was there that night, and I know what I saw before the indicator light went dark, and I know what I heard in the silence afterward, and those things in the official record have existed side by side in me for 6 years without resolution, and I do not expect resolution now. I only wanted someone outside of that silence to know that the silence exists and what it contains.